Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for February 22nd, Ash Wednesday. Your host, Peter Thomas Fornital, here with you in the Brooklyn bunker. Once again, sporting the Seattle Slew t-shirt, one of my good luck t-shirts we bust out from time to time. And joining me today, coming to us from the planet Texas, from InTheMoneyPodcast.com, he is Nick Tammaro. Nick, what's going on?
I'm doing great, my friend. You can see that I was a good Catholic this morning and already went to Mass, got ashes, and I noticed that the church was especially full and realized walking out that there are only a couple of days a year where the church gives you something. So that's why everybody showed up. It's usually them reaching into your pocket. So the fact that you're able to get ashes and something tangible to walk out with, I think certainly brought out the masses.
The wise guy in me is tempted to wander around the subway today, going up to people and pointing and saying, "Oh, there's something on your head," but I won't do that.
Yeah,
I can't.
you're a recovering Catholic, right? We all are.
I describe myself as an alumni, but many Ash Wednesdays in my life, I have adorned. I've adorned the ash, but you could be hiding under the hat here. But the good news is my face no longer.
Again. That's good news.
I no longer look like I went 15 rounds with the champ. I mean, it was too gross to do anything with, but I mean, I really did look like Stallone at the end of the first film. I mean, the eye was completely closed. It was bad, but I'm a fast healer. Apparently the doctor said it was going to be 2 weeks. I got back to pretty normal here in 9 days. We'll take it. But let's move on right away to I'm just going to hit you with a thesis statement here, Nick, before we get into the particulars of any of these races. And my thesis statement is that all along we've been waiting, every week there's been one level of prep or another. And I feel like we've been waiting for some horse to emerge and be one that's going to put themselves right to the top of the market there with the two horses who've been at the top of the market for the last several weeks for this Kentucky Derby, talking about Arabian Knight and Forte. And I feel like every week that goes by that we don't see that performance, we have to start thinking a little bit more seriously that maybe these two at the top of the market are actually going to end up being decent value at the 10-1 that they're available at internationally. And I'll start off with a tangent right away. When looking at Arabian Knight, when looking at Forte, I just noticed that what I would describe as the sharpest book in Europe has now gone clear favorite on Arabian Knight. I think it's really interesting head-to-head between these two because their profiles are so different, with Arabian Knight following very much of what you might call the modern profile of a Derby horse, the more lightly raced, showing brilliance, as opposed to Forte, a 2-year-old with actual, foundation like we used to see in the old days. But if I made you pick right now, let's call them both 10-1 between Arabian Knight and Forte, which direction would you go?
I would take Arabian Knight only because the massive variable that exists with Forte is, is he going to take a step forward as a 3-year-old? Right. We know Arabian Knight is a fast 3-year-old. In all likelihood, Forte will at least be able to run back to what he was. But, is he Nyquist or is he Game Winner? Right? Mm-hmm. Nyquist got better as a 3-year-old. Game Winner kind of didn't. We saw the best of Game Winner as a 2-year-old. And so those are good recent examples, I think, that are appropriate as far as for comparison's sake. I mean, maybe you could say Classic Empire. He didn't really move forward much as a 3-year-old. So that's kind of what we're waiting for. It felt to me, given that Forte debuted relatively early, he was a Belmont spring debut. He's probably a horse that was always a little ahead of the curve. Those are the types that you want to be very careful with because the pack catches up to them very quickly. And, if you were the proverbial, junior high baller playing against 5th graders, then you're going to look really good. And so that
if you're a head taller, it helps.
If you're a head taller, it helps. Exactly. And so, despite having one basic hiccup in his 2-year-old campaign, otherwise he got very good as the season went on. And, now he's catching a whole new batch of horses. It's a whole new group. So I would favor Arabian Knight for that reason. But, look, let's be honest. There's got to be a certain level of concern about the fact that these Bob Baffert trainees did not perform as well when they were in different barns after they left his care in the spring of 2022. So, and now, they're going to be in other people's barns for even longer. So, I've not really gotten involved in all of the ins and outs of this, but like, is Baffert able to train them and then transfer them to Yaktine for the race? I don't, this is such uncharted territory. I don't really know.
Yeah, I think is there a certain amount of days before? It's confusing. We should, let's look into that, and we'll get all the info and have that in a future.
I prefer to speak intelligently on it, even for us, but yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously Arabian Knight last seen in the Southwest, dominating victory, going to apparently come back in the Rebel. So that's no, not the Rebel. Is he waiting for the? Oh, hang on.
Is he a San Felipe?
I've got him listed. The only probable I see for him on the Horse Racing Nation site, let me confirm this, but I think the only probable I see for him is Arkansas Derby, which would be, that's the only one he's listed as probable for. But doesn't it seem like there'd be one before that? He's only raced.
It really would. Yeah, it really would. I mean, I'd be very surprised if he only wants to run him once more. He's got no foundation, really, with just a 7/8 debut and the Southwest. I would imagine he's a horse that they'd want to keep home, maybe because I saw that Hijazi is nominated to the Gotham, who obviously is from the same connections. So if he's shipping over to Aqueduct, then I think it makes sense for Arabian Knight to run in the San Felipe. And that would still give him 4 weeks to Arkansas Derby and 5 to the Santa Anita Derby. So I think that would make the most sense.
That does make more sense. The other question with Arabian Knight is that the Southwest, dominating though it was, he's a 2 to 5 shot in the slop. Like it really would be nice to see. I'll just for the sake of argument, I'll go Team Forte for that question. I think, and it is very open, right? You look at this pedigree and feels like it could go either way. Violence on the top, average winning distance is whatever it is, probably 6.5. It's not, you don't associate, they can go farther, but you don't associate them more with, the brilliance and precocity side of your theory. And then, blame on the damn side though, which was time and distance. We're going to know so much more about Forte. And we know that he is going to be running, as knock on wood, in the Fountain of Youth, which is not this weekend, but next weekend. So I think the Derby picture will, whether or not this hypothesis is correct about, maybe these two who've been there at the top of the market now for a minute being the two to follow, we're going to have a lot more information soon as far as that goes, because this weekend's a little quiet. What do we have? We have the Saudi race and the Rebel, right? And it doesn't feel terribly likely that the Saudi race does this. I'll ask. I keep committing the crime that you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to ask a question like this that you don't know the answer to. But are there points associated with the Saudi race, or is it more of just a big purse showcase?
I think there are points. I know that a Baffert horse is going, and I think it's Ford Bragg, one of those is going. So yeah, I believe obviously. What's that?
Having a meltdown.
Yo, he's going. Interesting.
Yeah, I've got him. I mean, again, these are just listed as probables on the HRN site, but I see Having a Meltdown and I see Speedboat Beach from the Baffert barn, both listed there. And then, and then those look like the only USA probables at this time. So, but they're not eligible for points anyway. So, if it's not a points race, they could still, end up being on a path should they do something, wildly impressive this weekend. I assume we'll be covering all things Saudi on the plus side. I would like to get some coverage up for that day, and the Rebel will probably do later in the week along with our regular coverage. But yeah, I'm just starting to look at that 10-1 on Forte and thinking, you know what? Maybe he could be a 4-1, 7-2 type favorite in this race if the path continues along the way that it's that it's going from here. Because you look at some of these horses in behind, and there's some good horses, but if you made me choose between 10-1 Forte and 16-1 Cave Rock or 20-1 Extra Añejo or Tapit Triche, I think I'd rather just go ahead and take Forte at those kind of numbers, just given what we've seen and what I think we can expect for him in terms of being able to train on.
Yeah, as of right now, right. I mean, you're talking about a number that could very well be twice what he is on the first Saturday in May. So, yeah, I mean, he's the big variable right now, and the waiting continues. But as Tom Petty said, the waiting is the hardest part.
Well put. Let's go to the Risen Star and talk about this race where the other Brad Cox got the job done. Angel of Empire posing the upset at 13-1, took advantage of a fast pace and came running late and got the job done. I mean, I don't know, this was a long shot exacta where I think you can make the case that there's as many stories about who didn't show as who did. But did you see this one before the race at all, Angel of Empire?
No, and quite honestly, I mean, he was the other Brad Cox, right? I mean, he was Victory Formation and Tapits Conquest.
Right.
Both
Right.
took
The
more
other.
money. So, yeah, he was kind of the outcast amongst the Brad trio. And Brad had a huge day on Saturday, and I think won 4 races in the first 5 at Fairgrounds. Got to 2,000 wins while poor Steve Asmussen was waiting at 9,999 for all 3 days, basically. I didn't see Angel of Empire. I didn't get this horse. I thought that he ran fine last time out behind his stablemate, but I didn't feel particularly compelled that he'd take a big step forward. He did, and he ran well. This was more of I guess you could say maybe a more traditional Derby prep in the sense that it was a big field, there was a big pace. We saw things change hands on the front end quite a bit. And I think that worked to the favor of anybody looking to make a big off the pace move. And that's what was done by the eventual winner. Maybe not a big off the pace move, but he came from a good bit off of it. Tapits Conquest made a nice move from off the pace. Sun Thunder, the runner up as well, was probably about, I'd say 8 or 9 lengths off the lead. The winner came from 5 lengths out with 5 furlongs to go. So yeah, it was a race where the pace was pretty taxing on everybody forwardly placed. Big disappointment was Victory Formation. I really don't know who was betting Victory Formation at 9-5, though. Even an elementary level of handicapping would indicate to you that this was a race that looked like it had a lot of speed. He had the 13 post, and bet on these horses in these scenarios at your own risk. When you're talking about a one-way speed type that's now finally having to go long in a situation where he's not going to control the pace, these are bad speed. And then he played out that way again.
Yeah, the pace definitely is an excuse for some of these, but some handled it better than others. It's tempting. I'm tempted to upgrade a horse like Two Phil's, honestly, who at least made a move in the middle of that fast pace and stuck on gamely to finish within hailing distance in third. When you look at the run that Tapits Conquest made just on paper, it makes me wonder if the distance didn't because he was coming from far back, made a big move, but then just flattened out. But in a way that I think it makes me question a little bit if the 1 1/8 was a little bit beyond Tapits Conquest scope. And this is a horse that a lot of people that we've talked to, Frank McGoey specifically, been very, very high on for quite a while. What's your best guess on Tapits Conquest from here?
Yeah, I mean, you can't love the way he finished. He really didn't finish with the kind of interest that you'd like to see from a horse who ultimately is going to successfully negotiate another furlong. He did go wide, and going wide at Fairgrounds can easily be a death sentence. But, I think that all things considered, if you had drawn up his trip with that pace ahead of time, Florent and Brad Cox would have said, we'll take it 8 days a week. So, having to go 3-4 wide on the second turn, but getting yourself into contention inside, basically right at the quarter pole, that's the kind of trip that you want to see for an off the pace horse. And he just flattened out in the last furlong. I will say, as far as off the pace rides go in that race, Brian Hernandez Jr.'s ride on Sun Thunder for second was incredible. He saved ground the entire way, and there's been a lot of discussion of Kenny McPeak's record in graded stakes races when his horses are coming off of Lasix, but in situations where they're not using Lasix, it's been a little, he's on the lower percentage side. That horse ran very well. All things considered, I totally agree with you on Two Phil's. I am dying for Two Phil's to just get a little bit more dirtied up and then get a cutback. This horse feels like a Pat Day Mile type to me. I mean, I'm dying for him to be cut back for that. He's done the classic cutback thing in 2 straight races, which is make a big move. Jareth Loveberry has a very clear style riding him. He wants to get him. He stays quiet on him until it's time. and he's got a little bit of a kick at that point, but he just can't seem to stay. And he looks like a horse that's going to top out at a mile to me. Really, I understand he's already a stake winner at longer, but he's going to be at his best at that distance. And so I'm looking for him to come back in that kind of scenario. In terms of also ran kind of no shows, I mean, Victory Formation was the one that stuck out the most. The three Steve Asmussen runners collectively did basically no running at all. Harlow Cap, who was close to the pace and just ended up stopping, Silver Heist and Private Creed. But I mean, again, they were 23-1, 37-1, and 7-1. So I don't want to beat up on them too badly. Harlow Cap is a horse who we've probably seen his best, and it's just not going to be good enough.
Yeah, on time form, that half was coded red. It feels like for Harlow Cap, it was just a question of going too fast, and a horse also that, just looking at the pace line, looks like one potentially well suited to cut back or face lesser. And just to underline the Sun Thunder run, that on paper looks like the classic Andy Beyer move into a hot pace trip angle, where this is a horse I definitely would be interested in. Now, everybody was, as you might expect, slowing down a bit late in there. So I'm not sure in a race where, and I probably should have said this earlier, but where the final figure came back, I think it was in lockstep between Beyer and time form around in 89. Does that suit your does that match your understanding of it? I can look it up for sure here. It just, I don't know. It feels like a fast kind of average to slow race shape. It doesn't feel like the kind of race in general that we're looking for horses that are going to be major players on the Triple Crown Trail. And therefore, that it's actually what led me to my little hypothesis, just a podcast discussion for fun hypothesis, that maybe these horses at the top of the market are the ones that we need to be spending a little bit more time talking about.
Yeah, totally agree with that sentiment. I mean, it feels very unlikely. We saw the Derby winner on Saturday. It's going to take one of these horses taking a pretty unforeseen step forward at this point. They just didn't really finish up like horses that are dying for bigger objectives. And, you compare it to last year's Risen Star. I think we all kind of knew Epicenter had a bit of a look to him, and so did Zandon. You even had Smile Happy, who had looked very good coming into that. So what this race obviously had in terms of quantity, it didn't quite have in terms of quality. So I would say that what it will do is, the guys that are loaded with 3-year-olds that are obviously on the trail, they'll take a hard look at the Louisiana Derby. I mean, there's no reason not to at this point. It also buys you a little bit of extra time to get to Kentucky, 6 weeks rather than 4 or 5. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how that shakes out.
Let's move to the 3-year-old filly division and the Rachel Alexandra. We'll see if you refrain from making snarky comments about your previous Derby horse, Hoosier Philly, who
you have a fever or something. You really think I'm going to stay away from that?
I was being fully sarcastic. Hey,
yes.
To be fair, I mean, no, there's no way to spin this. I was going to try to say something contrarian for podcast fodder about being so far back in a pace that was notably slow. But, at 2-5, there's no other way to characterize that effort than a disappointment. Meanwhile, Pretty Mischievous gets the job done, sitting just off that slow pace set by Miracle. The Timeform US figure comes back just a 104. Again, not the kind of roughly like an 84 Beyer, and I'll take a look what the actual Beyer was, 83. I mean, these aren't numbers that are going to have anybody thinking Oaks.
No, I agree. Yeah, it doesn't even have Tom Amos thinking Fairgrounds Oaks at this point. He said he was going to regroup and see if she'll be ready to go there. We saw Serengeti Empress run poorly in her 3-year-old season, but that always looked like it had something to do with more of a mechanical issue, so to speak. Hoosier Philly broke slowly. I saw the pictures on Twitter, and everybody had to rush to her defense and come up with why all the big bad meanies like me are wrong about her just not being very fast. And so Edgar Morales, who is actually riding very well at Fairgrounds, said that the stumble just really put him out of position. And the problem that I have with that notion is that, essentially with about 5/16, 3/8 to go, she got her way into the clear. And, this was a race that it was sort of the slow pace was kind of a mirage in that it was a very slow opening quarter, but then the field packed up and the second quarter they sped up appreciably. So, it wasn't the classic slow pace. The other problem is that they just completely sprinted away from her late. Like she had nothing in the stretch. So the stumble didn't have a damn thing to do with that, right? I mean, so maybe she was a little farther back than they would have liked to be, but when they turned for home, she angled out, and he's about to hit her with the crop and realizes that like there's nothing there. So, do you want to give her a slight excuse if you bet on her and you feel compelled to? I suppose. I think that we learned from her something that you and I have talked about at length and that we've seen numerous times, which is that a lot of times good-looking 2-year-olds don't really take a step forward. This filly had just become so massively overrated because of the silly chart comments and the rhetoric from the connections about her being a Derby horse and so on and so forth. And so very simply, she just became overrated. She just became monstrously overrated. And the expectation, I'll ask you this, Pete, as objective as one can be, and we crave objectivity as horse players. If you look at that race on paper and you tell me that she looks like a 2 to 5 shot, we're using totally different past performances. We're using totally different past performances. I mean, any handicapper worth their salt is using some type of speed figure. Don't give me this eye test crap, right? The eye test means nothing when you're not taking into consideration how fast they went, who they were running against, et cetera, et cetera. The problem that I had with her, in addition to that, was that she beat Pretty Mischievous at Churchill. Pretty Mischievous came right back and improved in the untappable. If you thought and you projected Pretty Mischievous maybe taking another step forward, you realize that Hoosier Philly was getting a totally different version of Pretty Mischievous on Saturday. And guess what? After the race, you realize she got a totally different version of her, to the point where Brendan Walsh was like, hey, you guys now are underrating my filly. And I think he's right, all things considered. I think she's nice. And she feels like a horse who distance will always be on her side. Look, it's the same situation we've had with the 3-year-old fillies all winter. Is they've got a case of the slows. They've got to speed up a little bit, and whoever the last gal standing is probably one that's going to be able to use her speed and get into a forward position and kind of start dictating to everybody else.
If you want to continue to hold the flame for Hoosier Philly, I think the best thing to do is to look back at Serengeti Empress. As you mentioned, it was a little bit different because she aired in this race. She aired in the Rachel Alexandra, but then she came back in the Fairground Oaks and laid an absolute egg. Like I don't know if she cracked.
Is it a bled situation? I feel like we were told
an excuse.
She may have bled.
Yeah, yeah, she did. Because she was Van off. Yes, that's right. I'm remembering. Right. Yeah, she bled and was Van off. So that is a little bit different. But it is interesting that not only then she bounces back and wins the Oaks and gets JK in all kinds of trouble with various comments and wagers made about her future. But that wasn't the only time she had sort of gone off and come back to form too. But I don't know. You may have hit on the key point. It's different when you have an excuse as pointed and in the chart as bled. It does make it a little bit easier to construct that narrative where they may come back into form. We'll see what happens. I mean, hopefully. I mean, look, I'd like to see her do well. I think it's always interesting. I like these kind of. From a podcast host point of view, it's kind of fun to have these divisive horses and competing narratives. And, I'm obviously more on your side in terms of, what you're saying about the PPs and everything. But it's fun to have this as a particular football to kick around a little bit.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think one of the things that we stick to is we're people that believe in speed figures, and speed figure makers take a lot of flack, and all of them kind of flexed a little bit after they crossed the wire on Saturday, because they knew that while that may not have been Hoosier Philly's best effort, her best efforts really weren't nearly as good as people were making them out to be. And chart callers using comments like frolicked. Yeah, that needs to stop. That needs to be. Yeah.
That's a funny one. That's a very funny one. A couple more things from the weekend. I did want to ask you about the Razorback and Last Samurai earning a very impressive 105 buyer speed figure there. How good is Last Samurai? Is it's a horse that could be a divisional player in a division that needs some players?
I mean, only because of the second part of what you said, right? I mean, it's just not a division that's any good. So yeah, he would have to merit some consideration as far as being a player in the division. You know, he ran well in the Pegasus and he totally and completely backed that up. So, you know, you've got to give him some acknowledgement for doing so. Have we seen some Dwayne Lucas horses over time run a little bit better at Oaklawn than anywhere else? Yeah, I mean, to an extent. Secret Oath took her game to Churchill without problem last year, and then, you know, ran into some issues as the year went on. But this horse got a very good ride from Christian Torres. Really, all things considered, didn't get much of a setup, and was able to reel in Law Professor and West Willpower, who were respectively ridden by two guys that probably feel like they couldn't win a one-horse race right now, and Joel Rosario and Jose Ortiz. Jose not quite as much, but Joel is just having an absolutely brutal winter into the spring. You know, I'm sure that's something he'll bounce out of, but it was a funny race in terms of the betting because they were the two clear favorites with Ginobili, the third choice. And Ginobili was just a total no-show. And that was surprising for a variety of reasons. He had not only run well at Oaklawn, but he felt like a horse that really ran his best races with Lasix. And I think that's part of the reason why he was there. So Law Professor traveled really well. I thought going into, I had a Last Samurai Law Professor Exacta, and going into the turn, I thought that was a cinch to cash. And he not only stopped, but he stopped and got beat for second by 7 lengths. Yeah. So it was kind of a funny race in that respect. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. Last Samurai will dance every dance now. I'm sure he'll be in the Essex and the Oaklawn handicap in advance of something maybe at Churchill, like the Foster. So he's a horse that clearly has shown some ability in the past, and now looks like he might be putting it all together.
I can't get out of here today without talking about my namesake, who returned to action at Aqueduct on Monday, Looms Boldly, who had missed a little bit of time since the previous race, had gotten back on track, was reportedly doing well. I have to say, just physically in the paddock, didn't look as good as he did on the day of the maiden win. And I actually didn't end up betting. I was like, I thought that, also just on looks that the Mott runner that was in there looked very daunting, and I figured I had enough on just emotionally to go ahead and root. And for a second there, didn't break well. No real excuse. It was just one of those just didn't show much alacrity. Sped up nicely, made this very nice move to look like he might win, and then flattened out in I'm just going to say in the manner of a short horse, getting the long shot, re-rallying to beat him for second. Maybe I'm being a homer here, but I'm keeping the faith. I'm thinking we're going to see a much better Looms Boldly next time out. Be honest. What did you think of the effort? There were two signs of worry. If you want to take the negative view, would be the not breaking well, and then the letting the re-rallying horse beat him. Would those give you concerns about him going forward, or do you think I'm okay with my optimistic view?
No, I think there's some talent there, no doubt about it, because he did make a pretty sustained move to get to the lead after the slow break. You know, he has enough speed to get himself into position, so he's kind of always going to be dangerous. It's just going to be a matter of them kind of honing in on what he's missing right now and figuring out if it's there somewhere. I think blinkers could be a solution. That might not only help him out of the gate, but it also might help him kind of sustain one run the whole way around there, because he did get a little tired late. You know, this is a horse that broke his maiden 3 months ago, and they'd been looking for a spot. There was supposed to be a stake that he didn't get into or didn't fill. So I think they've just had some issues with getting him into the races. And apparently he's a little aggressive with the feed tub at times, and that might be why his fitness wasn't all the way there. Not that has anything to do with his namesake. But
are you fat shaming me and my horse?
Not at all. Hey, I can do it, but if anybody, but I am not. I was going to say if they throw him a little IPA action, it could be really troublesome. But no, I think he's got some talent. You know, the Mott horse was very disappointing. He didn't really run at all.
Did he have an excuse? Was he bothered with that incident in the beginning? I meant to go back. I've watched the replay a bunch, and of course, only stared at the one horse. I haven't done a good job looking at this objectively.
He didn't have the cleanest of runs early. Agreed. But I think he also may have been a horse that was just really ready to rock and roll on debut. And there was always going to be a little bit of regression, but there shouldn't have been that much regression. He just didn't fire the way that you would expect him to. Nobody got hurt early. Like Looms Boldly was out of the gate slowly. Problem, the Mott horse just didn't really break, and you see Liscano is kind of tapping him on the shoulder down the backstretch, and he started to advance a little bit, but he just never really picked up the bit. So.
Please Be Nice is the name.
Please Be Nice. We're talking about.
I want to pull the numbers because this is just anecdotal, but I do think it's right that a lot of times, and I don't know why this would be, but a lot of times these Mott runners that do run really well and win on debut, they don't seem to improve the way that the Mott runners that just run okay do. Like there's some. And maybe you could say that's just a statistical regression to the mean thing, but I feel like it's more than that. I don't know. It'd be an interesting question to dive into the stats on and maybe even ask about at some point. If for some reason he has some that he brings there a little bit more in form, ready to perform on debut, and they tend to have a more even developmental profile as opposed to so many of his, I feel like, that are more being given a race and you can expect them to improve. We don't really think about the same trainer having different patterns with different horses, but it only stands to reason that would be true. But yeah, that one certainly underperformed at 3 to 5 there on Monday.
No doubt. There was a good excerpt from the late Dave Litvin's book, Expert Handicapping, where he discussed horses that get over 70 Beyer speed figures on debut. And he put some stats in there, but they regress at an alarmingly high rate. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. So, yeah, we'll see where Looms Boldly ends up next. I think it could be interesting. The 10 Strike Connections also had Seafoam in the Haynesfield on Monday, and somehow I was going to joke with Marshall and tell him your horse found the only fast breakneck pace that you're going to have probably all winter. And Seafoam got into it with What Do You Think Now and set things up for the off the pace horses like Dr. Ardito and Bankit. So it was a little bit of a frustrating go of it there, but yeah, we'll see what happens moving forward.
I got to watch that race with the trainer Michelle, and it was as soon as those first fractions went up, we kind of knew which way that was going. They need to write some of those stakes going a mile and an eighth, and you might see something. You might see some better form from Seafoam at some point for our friends over there at 10 Strike Racing. Anything else you want to hit on before we get out of here for this edition of the show?
No, I think that was it. I think there weren't any big stakes performances worth discussing. I didn't see any maidens really. There was a one other then on the fairgrounds card that in the past we've seen some of these races yield better performances, but it really it looked rather ho-hum. I guess the story in it was that Banishing didn't run well, and so that
horse we talked about some earlier on, and
we had other. Otherwise, Brendan Walsh had a pretty big day. I guess Denington won the race for Kenny McPeak, got up by a neck. He was coming out of a race at Oaklawn. Tapit Shoes, who some had considered to be maybe potentially a Derby type horse. I think he was in the future pool that we talked about back in January. And he was a rather non-threatening third. I guess, and now looking through these charts, I remember the horse worth mentioning on the card is Bishop's Bay, who broke his maiden by 3/4 of a length over a stablemate, who actually ran very well also. And they got 115 and 114 time form US figures, I think mid-90s buyers. I will say, though, that, and actually interestingly, is that so this horse, Bishop's Bay, is out of a mare named Catch My Drift, who was owned by Hiddenbrook, and the principal owner amongst the Hiddenbrook group was a very close friend of mine from Houston who passed away a couple of years ago, but he loved Catch My Drift. She was trained by Chad Brown, and so this horse really should stretch out without any issue at all. But Brad Cox has already said no Derby, not happening. Too far behind, not going to rush him into a final prep. So that's good to hear, and I think they'll end up looking at some later season objectives with him. But those two, Bishop's Bay and First Mission, were both first-time starters for Brad Cox, and they both look like they could really be something. I believe Bishop's Bay is from the ownership group that includes the tons of people in the Liz Crow 3-year-old venture.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, these figures came back great. 97. I'm so glad you mentioned this. 97 for Bishop's Bay, 96 for First Mission. And as far as Brad Cox having more talented looking 3-year-olds, I'm going to put that in the same category as, oh gosh, this water is wet. It's just one of these things. Just one of these things we've come to expect. As for that allowance race, we might as well do the figures on that. Denington gets a 91, but it's, you know, 3 on the wire kind of 91 doesn't get me like as pumped, but it is certainly notable that there were, gosh, what were there? Five 3-year-olds on the card that ran faster than Angel of Empire by speed. Obviously, it's different. We're talking about 6 furlong races versus 9 furlong, etc. But it does sort of underline that point about maybe not getting too excited about the form of the Risen Star in general.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly get your blood flowing. That's a fact. So it gives you a little cause for pause. The second place finisher who we mentioned is a First Mission, who is a Godolphin that has a remarkably crappy pedigree. Most of these Godolphin horses have really good pedigrees, but this horse is his pedigree is loaded with horses who really couldn't run. But hey, it happens. You know, it's the dam has only produced one other horse who wasn't really productive, and then the second dam really there's nothing in her pedigree. I think the third dam has something to like, but anyway, I mean, it doesn't matter at this point. Once they put a saddle on him, it doesn't really matter as much to me, unless you're talking about changing surfaces. So either way, yeah, Brad Cox maybe he had a couple of horses in the Risen Star exit the Derby Trail. And even though Bishop's Bay may not get on the Derby Trail, he feels like a good late season 3-year-old. And look, I mean, it's, we spend an awful lot of time talking about the Derby because we focus on the Derby for the first half of the year. But, the years 16, 17, 18 would easily teach you that it's just as important to have a good late season 3-year-old. There's a lot of objectives out there that you can win en route to a championship because, I mean, I believe not 18 because of Justify, but in 16 and 17, both of them, the season honors were won by horses who didn't even run in the Derby.
Right. It's not common, but it happens. And, just in terms of our personal preference, look, I mean, we've been more Derby focused this year than ever before. We've got a lot of great content over at inthemoneypodcast.com. Eric Solomon, Eric DeCoster doing a great job. And this is by popular demand. I mean, we see what people click on, we see what people watch, and Derby content is what, give the people what they want. But there's a whole lot of other stuff out there in racing that we're super excited about, arguably even more excited about in the big picture of life. And we hope that some of these folks that come for the Derby are going to stay for the summer and the Breeders' Cup and everything along those lines. So hopefully that's how it plays out. Good stuff, Nick. Why don't we get together later in the week? Maybe we'll talk a little Rebel and Santa Anita if you're game for that.
Sounds like a plan. Let's hope for some sunny weather out west and have him actually race on Saturday.
Yeah, that's right. Friday already canceled at Santa Anita. I should have mentioned that, but they do seem optimistic about getting Saturday in from what I've been seeing. Have you seen anything different?
I haven't. I looked at the forecast on Monday. It didn't look good, but again, I mean, this is 48 hours later, so maybe there's been a little improvement.
All right. Well, if nothing else, gosh, I don't know what we'll do. If there's no Santa Anita, that means there's no Coast to Coast. It could be a rare weekend off. It could just be a Saudi Plus show and you and I doing a deep dive on the Rebel. We'll figure it out one day at a time. That's how we roll here at In the Money Media. Nick, we'll thank you again for your help and support. We'll thank our founding partners, 10 Strike Racing and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. We appreciate their support. We appreciate all of you out there, the listeners, the viewers. Let us know if you're watching on YouTube, especially in the comments. Give us your head-to-head Arabian Knight versus Forte, assuming 10-1. Let us know what you think. Curious to get a sense of what the public is all about as far as that goes. This show's been a production of In the Money Media. Help us out by subscribing to our YouTube channel, by signing up for us wherever you get your podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe, or even better, tell the degenerate friends in your life about us. We'd love to have them in the In the Money tent as well. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.